If you've ever played Final Fantasy Tactics, then you already know that one wrong move can wipe out your entire party. This game punishes poor planning more than most, and small mistakes can snowball fast. So today we're breaking down the biggest mistakes most players still make in Final Fantasy Tactics, and how you can avoid them to build the strongest team possible. Jumping in, mistake number 1 is not equipping basic healing and revival items like potions and Phoenix down on all of your characters. So this is going to be an early mistake, but it is absolutely huge because early on your team is especially vulnerable to wipes and restarts. Losing a unit in battle especially is urgent because that unit getting KO'd starts a death timer, 3 little hearts above their head, and if that timer runs out, the unit is going to turn into a crystal or a treasure chest and they're gone forever. Plus, as a beginner you might be tempted to rely more on white magic, which is going to be slower to cast and expensive early on. Instead, just learn and equip the chemist item command set on multiple units right away. It's going to give you access to fast, reliable healing through potions, and most importantly, revives using Phoenix Down. Keeping a few characters, in fact, with the chemist job early on is also beneficial because they innately have access to the throw item ability, which means that you can use these same items from quite a distance. Again, very useful because your units will also have lower mobility stats at this point too. So early on, always aim to have at least 2 characters equipped with items to ensure that redundancy. Later on, monks can learn revive, which is instant and costs no MP. So once you have some monks in your party, you can safely free up other units from carrying items. Mistake number 2 is trusting the game's auto-equip system, which is more confusing than you might think. But that's because in Final Fantasy Tactics, the game's auto-equip feature looks convenient, but it is deceptive. It prioritizes gear basically with the highest HP or MP stats, giving you a nice looking upward green arrow on your character, but also ignoring some of the more important stats in the game, specifically physical attack, magic attack, and even speed. A bit of extra HP is not always worth sacrificing your attack or speed bonuses. And this happens a lot, and it's something that you need to watch out for. Specifically, when you change jobs or use the outfitter in town, the game is going to try to auto-equip the gear for you, and you always want to double check and manually optimize your stats. Make sure you prioritize gear that boosts your PA, your MA, and your speed, even if your HP does drop slightly. An example of this is your accessory slot. Within hours of starting the game, you can equip accessories that give you a +1 to your movement, which is great. And after a few hours, you can equip things like the power gauntlets, which boost your PA, making melee units hit very hard. You can also add evasion with cloaks, helping to boost the defense of your spellcasters. Getting a 10% chance to evade attacks is a massive win early on in the game, but auto-equip will not do this for you. Mistake number 3 is not upgrading equipment between story battles, and that's because after specific story encounters and chapter progression, new items are going to unlock at the outfitters. So you should be checking constantly for meaningful upgrades to your gear. Also, certain towns will have different gear options. Some might have heavy armor and night weapons, while others might have a bow or gun. So after a major story beat, it's best to go back and check around a few towns for spellcasters, melee units, and miscellaneous items before doing that next tough story battle. Also, don't buy every new, slightly upgraded weapon or gear piece. Only specific ones that give you big stat boosts are going to give you the most benefit. Also, if you're only temporarily using jobs like the archer, for example, don't bother, upgrading them too much because you might not be staying on that job for your long-term team. Now within the Outfitter UI, you can use the try and buy feature, and this is going to show you the units who can actually equip those new items and how their stats will change. So again, every time you finish a story fight, a good routine is check your JP, learn any new abilities, swap to any new jobs, and then go to the Outfitter and see if there are any new upgrades available that would actually make a difference. Mistake number 4 on this list is a big one, and that is rushing through the early jobs. This is by far one of the biggest traps I see new players fall into, trying to unlock the best, most flashiest jobs as fast as possible. And I get it, you want to see the ninja or the samurai get added to your team, and you want those right away. But in Final Fantasy Tactics, skipping the fundamentals actually hurts your team a lot more later on in the game. That's because early jobs like Squire, Chemist, and Knight might seem boring at first, but they're actually packed with many essential abilities to make your team stronger long term. A JP boost is a perfect example of this. It's one of the most important passive abilities in the entire game because it lets you gain job points faster, but you learn it on the very first job, the Squire. And actually, the sooner you can grab this, the better, because you'll unlock every other job in the game even faster. The same thing goes for movement +1 and early reaction skills like auto potion. It's easy to ignore these again because they come from the first two jobs in the game, the squire and the chemist. They don't seem exciting or beneficial, but what they're doing is they're actually making your units more reliable in tough battles later on, giving you little wins every turn, like in some increased movement or a passive heal. Skipping these might get you to a more advanced job like ninja faster, but usually means you'll end up with underdeveloped characters who can't survive more challenging battles. So here's the rule. Before you rush off to unlock new jobs, take the time to master the key abilities in your current job. A few extra battles grinding JP now can save you hours of frustration later, because remember, Final Fantasy Tactics rewards patience and smart planning more than speedrunning. Mistake number 5 is not upgrading your movement. And this is a very common mistake too, because it's easy to focus purely on the best attacks and most powerful spells, but if your characters can't reach the enemy or climb through terrain or position themselves properly, all that power is going to be less effective. Movement in FFT isn't just mobility too, it's really survival, positioning, and strategy all rolled into one. So early in the game, your squire job gives you access to movement +1. It's one of the best early investments you can make. It's cheap, it's easy to unlock, and it instantly makes every battle smoother. That single extra tile of range often means you can grab a better position, reach an ally for healing, or escape a counterattack before it happens. Later on, thieves can take that even further with the movement +2 ability. This one is absolutely worth the little bit of extra JP investment. It's one of the most universally useful movement abilities in the game, especially for melee units or anyone that's going to be focused on treasure hunts. You can combine that with terrain-specific abilities like jump from the archer job, and suddenly your units can reach spots that enemies can't even touch. Speaking of that, pairing high movement with treasure hunter turns exploration into another advantage for your team. Many maps do hide rare gear or unique items on high or hard to reach tiles, and without these movement boosts, you'll never be able to get there. So plan on having at least one mobile unit that can scale cliffs, grab hidden treasures, and reposition before the enemy army even knows what happened. So don't ignore movement upgrades. They're not just convenience, they make your squad that much more effective. Mistake number 6 is forgetting to equip a proper secondary skill set. When you unlock multiple jobs and learn some additional abilities, you don't want to forget to equip your secondary ability as well. Now, the best at the very beginning of the game is items, since you can learn Potion and Phoenix down on almost any unit right away. Even if that character hasn't been playing a chemist, you should have 150 to 200 JP after leveling a few other chemists on your squad. Fundaments from the Squire job is also a helpful secondary ability set when transitioning to new jobs, because you get abilities that can earn you JP every turn, skills like Throw Stone, for example, or the Focus ability. So early on, make sure to keep those secondary abilities slotted, either items or fundaments. Then as you advance and learn multiple jobs, you want something that is going to synergize with the main job as well. We've talked about this, but early on, healing is so important. So for example, having a knight with just maybe one spell like Cure can make a huge difference. As you get more advanced though, your units like monks can heal and do damage with martial arts. This will actually free up your secondary abilities for more advanced setups, like using the Time Mage and Haste, or jobs like the Summoner that can really do everything, damage, heal, and buff, giving you a more diverse set of spellcasting and martial damage options. At all points though, just make sure you have at least 2 units that can revive, otherwise you'll experience a group wipe when randomly that unit goes down, and you can't revive Ramza after 3 turns. Mistake number 7 is not taking an action every turn. We talked about this a little bit already, but this is a huge mistake that is going to ruin your party's progression more over time. That's because in Final Fantasy Tactics, every single action that's successful, either attacking, casting, using items, performing abilities, whatever, is going to earn that character XP and JP. But if your unit simply waits without doing anything, then you get nothing in return. No experience, no job points, no progression. You multiply that by dozens of turns across multiple battles, and you've already thrown away hours of potential growth for that character. And that's why it's so crucial that every unit on your team has at least one ability that they can use every single turn, no matter where they are on the battlefield. If your melee unit can't reach an enemy this round, don't just stand there, give them something else to do. The best example of this early on is the Squire's Focus ability, which we mentioned. This is instant, it costs no MP to cast, and you can cast this infinitely every turn. So even if you're not doing something actively in combat, you're still earning XP and JP, making it the perfect ability for grinding, or simply just maximizing the value for that unit for the entire battle. Then if you pair focus or whatever ability with the JP boost, every action is going to then give you nearly double the amount of JP earned, meaning those characters level up faster, unlock new skills sooner, and you avoid falling behind in the mid-game and beyond. So remember, never waste a turn. If your character's alive, they should be doing something. In FFT, every action counts, and the player who uses every turn wisely is going to have a much easier time in this game. Number 8 is another combat mistake, and that's going to be not protecting your weakest units. One of the easiest ways to lose a battle in Final Fantasy Tactics is to leave your more fragile units exposed to damage. And every beginner is going to learn this the hard way. Your chemist or your white mage or your archer might be standing out in the open, and suddenly every enemy on the map is going to dogpile them in the same round. And that's not actually bad luck, that's the AI doing exactly what it's designed to do. That's because in Final Fantasy Tactics, enemy AI is surprisingly smart. It's going to actively prioritize your weakest units, those that have lower HP, lower defense, and it especially loves to flank them or attack from behind to deal even more bonus damage. So if you leave a squishy caster or support unit out alone on flat ground, you're basically painting a giant target on their back. That's why positioning is everything in this game, which we already talked about. You always want to use terrain to your advantage, especially with these weaker units. Place mages behind walls, on elevated tiles, or safely behind your frontline fighters. Abilities like Movement +1 make it easier to reposition when the enemy starts to close in, and if possible, keep at least one melee unit near your healers or ranged attackers as a kind of bodyguard ready to block those melee attackers from getting in closer. Even simple formations can make a huge difference. Protect the healer's sides and back with tanks or other physical units, and make sure your glass cannon units always have an escape route. Remember, if those support units go down, it makes the whole fight much more challenging. Mistake number 9 is one that's really specific, and it has to do with ignoring Brave and Faith values for your units. Brave and Faith is a bit of a hidden or lesser known system in Final Fantasy Tactics. Most players definitely overlook these stats, but in this game, Brave and Faith basically control some of the most important mechanics in the game, and ignoring them can make your characters dramatically weaker without you really even understanding why. So let's start with Brave. A low Brave value means that your character is going to deal less physical damage and have a much lower chance to trigger reaction abilities. Things like Counter and Auto Potion. A unit with 40 Brave on their stat sheet, for example, might barely ever counterattack, even if you spent the JP to unlock those reaction abilities. On the flip side, a high Brave stat of like 70 or above not only boosts your physical attack damage, but also makes that unit trigger reactions much more consistently. But that's why high Brave characters are going to be perfect for melee jobs like Squire, Monks, and Knights. As far as the Faith stat, this governs all things magical, and a high Faith stat means your spells hit harder, but it also means you take more damage from enemy magic. Low Faith characters, on the other hand, resist magic better, but their own spells will also be weaker, and that's why high Faith units are best suited for caster jobs like Black Mage, Time Mage, or the Summoner, while low Faith units actually make excellent anti-mage tanks or physical attackers who won't melt under the enemy's magic spells. Now, after you finish the tutorial, you can visit any Warriors Guild in a major town and recruit new generic units. And the main differences you want to look for in these units is their Brave and Faith stat values. Ideally, you want characters with Brave and Faith around 65 or higher to be more effective. And if you don't see a character that you like, you can actually back out and re-enter the Warriors Guild repeatedly because the stats and characters are randomized. Keep doing it until you get a generic unit that fits what you need. So again, don't ignore Brave and Faith. These aren't filler numbers. They actually make a huge difference on every single build in the game. If you master these early, you'll have a squad that feels unstoppable by the mid-game. Mistake number 10 is not paying attention to charge time mechanics. In Final Fantasy Tactics, certain abilities, especially magic, don't happen instantly. They have their own cast or charge time that must be completed before the effect triggers. When you queue up a spell, you'll see these numbers in the lower left corner with a spell icon and number. That's how you know exactly when the spell is going to actually happen. This is where a lot of beginners get burned, literally. Say your Black Mage targets an enemy with a fire spell, but before they finish casting, the enemy moves onto your nearby melee unit. Well, now both the character and the enemy are going to take the same fire damage because FFT allows for friendly fire, and most damaging spells have an area of effect. So this is why it's always crucial to check the turn order before committing to your cast. If an enemy is about to move before the spell finishes, then this can likely go very badly. This is also true of enemy spells, by the way, which can also be monitored in the turn order. If your enemy healer, for example, is about to save another enemy unit in 3 turns with a healing spell, well, it makes sense to try to finish off that enemy before the healing spell lands, otherwise your work damaging that previous enemy is wasted. It gets even more interesting later on in the game with more advanced units and abilities. Summoners have some of the most devastating spells in FFT, but their charge times are even longer, so proper timing and positioning are everything here. Learning when to risk a delayed spell for big damage and when to play it safe with instant abilities is going to be key for getting better at the game. A side tip here is that sometimes you can still cast effectively even when you can't reach an enemy unit directly or they're not in range. You can do this by placing an AoE spell next to the enemies targeted on a nearby tile, not the enemy itself, therefore extending your attack range depending on the size of the spell's AoE effect. Mistake number 11 is all about guest characters. Now, avoiding any spoilers, but many guest characters are going to join your team temporarily, even in the early chapters. Now, those units will often leave your party and sometimes even turn against you later on. Because that's the case, don't worry about leveling those characters up. Instead, focus on developing your core team of generic units and Ramza. That's going to be the best overall progression for you. In terms of guests, do think about balancing them though, because you don't want your guests to be too weak to contribute anything in story missions. It is rather easy to ignore them, for example, in the equipment UI because they don't show up on the same page as your generic units. So every once in a while, make sure to tab over, see what equipment your guest is using, and if you have any upgrades available. That way the guest characters don't become completely outclassed by everyone else on the battlefield. And also pro tip here is that you can unequip their gear before story events where the guests might leave to keep valuable items in your inventory. To do that, just always make sure to do a manual save before every major story battle. That way you can always go back to that save and make adjustments based on what happens. Mistake number 12 is not stealing from or poaching enemies. Now, while the thief isn't a powerhouse job for combat, it is absolutely the best for getting extra items and even making some gil. The thief has 2 mechanics specifically to only this job, that being steal and poach. Somewhere on your squad, you do want a unit that is specializing in thief and eventually ninja. This allows you to have one designated character to steal or poach the best items in the game. That's because oftentimes the best weapons and armor comes from fighting specific enemies in the story. You can steal their overpowered sword or armor straight from their inventory. Just like our previous tip, try to save and experiment during those story mode missions with the steal ability to see what you come up with. Poaching as well is another unique system that can give you access to even more powerful weapons and armor, oftentimes at a discount. So make sure you have at least one unit on your team actively making use of these systems so that you get all the benefits. Mistake number 13 is a big one, and that's not understanding stat growth. Every level you gain in a job is going to permanently affect the stats of that character. And leveling in the quote bad jobs in terms of growth actually weakens your unit long term. This is a very common mistake for beginners who often stay too long in a specific job for too many levels before realizing what it's doing to the overall stats of that character. Now there's 2 basic strategies to consider here. One would be like a physical stat growth strategy, and the other would be a magic stat growth strategy. For physical characters like monks, samurais, dragoons, and ninjas, they rely on high PA, HP, and speed to function at their best. These stats determine how hard they hit, how long they last in combat, and how frequently they act. That means you want to level up these characters in jobs that have better growth in those specific stats. The best jobs to level in for physical units are primarily going to be the monk, in terms of PA and HP growth, the Knight or Dragoon, which is excellent for more tanky melee units, and the Ninja or Thief, which have dramatic gains to speed. In terms of magical units, your magic users are focused mostly on high MA and MP. These affect spell potency and how many times you can cast during combat, Speed is less important here than it is for physical jobs, but a little bit can be helpful. So the best jobs to level in for a magical unit primarily are going to be the Black Mage for the best magic attack growth, the Time Mage for excellent MP and MA growth, as well as the Summoner job for strong MP and decent MA growth as well. But that brings us to our final mistake on this list, and maybe the most deadly of all, and that is over-leveling your characters too early. Now that's because in Final Fantasy Tactics, the game scales enemy levels to your party, but not always evenly. Over-leveling with strong abilities or equipment means enemies can outstat you. So for example, if you're grinding up levels, especially in Chapter 1, while making your units extremely strong early on does seem like a good idea, you should actually focus on doing a more balanced approach, redoing some random encounters, but not for hours on hours, unless you know the exact abilities and jobs to unlock. Otherwise, these seemingly easy battles against basic enemies will actually become extremely hard over time. A good rule of thumb is doing all those random battles, like we said, maybe a couple of extra times before a tough story fight to unlock a critical reaction, support, or a new job that you need, but doing nothing more than that. And when you need to unlock a powerful job like the ninja, but you have zero intention of using the archer, for example, this is where random encounters can be really helpful. Just get as many levels of the archer as you need, but then switch out of that job when you actually need to progress. If you are struggling though, it is helpful to review specific build guides, which is where a website like ours, hacktheminotaur.com, can be extremely helpful because we have tons of guides and builds for Final Fantasy Tactics already, which will show you the ideal progression paths for each job so you don't waste any time. Links for those are down below in the description, and a bonus tip here has to do with combat and specifically mission objectives. Believe me, you do not want to ignore mission objectives in Final Fantasy Tactics because they often make these missions much simpler. One common example is when a mission asks you to eliminate a single target on the battlefield. Now, if you KO or sometimes even get this target just to low health, the mission will automatically complete, meaning you don't have to defeat or even touch any of the other enemies that you are in combat with. So you can use this trick to save yourself a lot of time and energy and get through those story missions even faster. But as always, thanks for watching. If you got anything at all from this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so YouTube knows to share this video with others. Also, let us know in the comments down below any mistakes we missed, and be sure to check out our other FFT videos on screen now. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you around in the next video.